people tend to forget God when they're in good states. So what he's saying is that when you're in a good state, that's when you should be. The Prophet ﷺ was always with God. So whether he's in tribulation or whether he's in ni'mah, blessings, he's with God. Whereas a lot of people forget God when things are going well. And the Quran has many verses about that. They forget God when things are going well. So the Sahaba said the times of tribulation, they always felt secure in them because they knew that blessings were coming. Whereas when they were in blessings, they felt less secure because they knew tribulation followed it. But the point is, when you're in the blessing, is to be aware of it, right? In kunta fi ni'matin far'aha, fa inna al-ma'asi tuziru ni'am. If you're in blessing, guard it, and that's why, man shakara ni'amahu qayyadaha bi'iqaliha, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَشْكَرِ اللَّهَ عَلَى نِعْمِهِ تَعَرَّضَ لِزَوَالِهَا. That if you're not grateful when you have the blessings, then you're exposing them to losing the blessing. So the tribulations are, dunya is a dar of bala, but there's always blessings, there's always ihsan. Even in the blessings, even in the tribulations, there's ihsan, there's always ihsan. Ibn Abbas said in every tribulation there's 3 blessings that you should be aware of. It could be worse than what it is. Somebody loses a hand, they could have lost both hands. They lose an eye, they could have lost both eyes. Right? That it's in the dunya, it's in your worldly matters and not in your religious matters, because that's the real tribulation, is in the deen. رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْ مُصِيبَتَنَا فِي دِينِنَا. In other words, we know we're going to have masa'ib in the dunya, but don't make it in our deen. Make it in our dunya, if you're going to give us those tribulations. And then the third one is that it's in this world and not in the next world, because the real calamities are in the next world. So what he meant by that, man lam yuqad ilallahi bil-ihsan qida ilayhi bi-sarasir imtihan. He's just saying that if the ihsan doesn't bring you to God, just know that you're going to be brought to God with tribulations. You're going to be brought to God. But there's always tribulations. Is that clear? Yeah.
So in the chapter that we just covered, the author Imam Raghib Asfahani rahimahullah, he has a specific order. He says, quwa shahwiya, and then it's mu'tamira to the quwa ghadabiyya, and then quwa ghadabiyya to the
aqila. Yeah.
Quwa aqila. So but he doesn't go into details to the reasoning as to why the shahwiya is specifically supposed to be obeying.
Good point. Yeah.
So what is the reasoning behind it?
The reasoning behind that, because if we look at it from dar al-mafasid wa jalb al-masalih, dar al-mafasid muqaddama ala jalb al-masalih. So you have to. You always ward off harm. You would ward off harm before you would accrue benefit. So the purpose of the shahwa is to accrue benefit. The purpose of the quwwa al-ghadabiyya is to ward off harm. And so whenever the quwwa shahwiyya is going to do its appetite, is going to harm the person, it has to obey the faculty that protects the person from harm. Got it? But it's a good question. Go ahead, sister. Sorry. I'm looking over here, so I'm not ignoring you guys.
Assalamu alaikum. Could you just repeat the saying that you said, لو دام لغيرك
لو دام لغيرك لما وصل إليك. Had it continued, had it had a permanence for those before you, it would not have reached you. Yeah. It's it was, I think, from one of the caliphs in, 1,000 years ago. So the Kuwaiti ruler had, I don't know which one he had it put on there as a reminder, which is good. It's a momenti mori. تفضل دحية.
yesterday you mentioned the intellect relates to the salvific path and the path of sanctification. And you said that the path of sanctification is an arduous path. So I was wondering if there's a connection between taking on that path and, sort of in the traditional world, people went through these rites of passages and they had like initiatic moments. So maybe there was a connection between the two.
I mean, traditionally, the people would find a teacher who was somebody who had done that journey and was in a position to help that person on their path. And those traditionally they were the scholars who acted according to their knowledge. They had tahqiq, the muhaqqiqun. So in these latter days that we're in, I mean, by the 9th century already, scholars were bemoaning the fact that these people didn't really exist anymore. Ahmed Zarruq called it al-kibrit al-ahmar, is sometimes what is called the red sulfur, which was the alchemist's material that transmutes lead into gold. In other words, your toxic soul, that person would help you. They were a spiritual alchemist who would help you transmute your soul from a toxic state to a purified state. Ahmed Zarruq says, وَهُوَ مَعْدُوم. These people. So the best thing is just to find good teachers that are humble and have learned, hopefully in chains as well. It's not an absolute requisite. Imam Suyuti mentions that. As long as they're qualified to be teaching, and then the signs are pretty clear. They should follow one of the rightly guided schools, and then not have any bid'ah. Now, who determines what that is? Well, hopefully it's the schools that do that. So part of the problem now is that we have, there's been a breakdown of all these things. So we're in a time of what they call anomie in sociology. And it's just a time where things have broken down. And so it's very difficult for people. And a lot of people are grappling. But in these latter days, the Prophet ﷺ said that there would be a lot of leniency. If you adhere to 1/10 of what the Prophet brought, then you'll be saved. Whereas the Sahaba had to follow all of it. And that's not to say, any compromise on the foundational things like the 5 pillars. That's not in any way. But in other words, these are difficult times. And the Prophet ﷺ said about his ikhwan, he said, ikhwani, he was like yearning for his brothers and sisters. I mean, it's understood in the language of the Arabs. And they asked him who they were. And he said, there will be people that come towards the latter days. He said they would do anything if they could see me. And then he said they will have the reward of 50 people. And they said, 50 to us? And he said, yes. And he said, how is, they couldn't understand. They said, how is that? And he said, لَكُمْ أَعْوَانٌ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ وَلَيْسَ لَهُمْ أَعْوَانٌ. You have lots of helpers. In other words, the whole society is facilitating. Like when I lived in West Africa, everybody prayed tahajjud. It was just normal. Like the whole village, you heard people reciting Quran at 3, 4 in the morning, every morning. So to grow up in a society like that, it's facilitating for you. But if you're living in a society where everything is distracting you from God, and yet you're doing your best to remain present with God, your reward is going to be, inshallah, it'll be immense. So I mean, I've told this story before, but it was a very profound, for me, it really had an impact on me where with this stewardess, I was with Muhammad al-Awadi, the Kuwaiti intellectual. He's a brilliant Kuwaiti man. And we were flying together, and there was a stewardess, and I can't remember how it came up, but he asked her about how she felt about having to serve wine And she said, I always serve it with my left hand. You know, I mean, I don't know. Allah's Arham ar-Rahimin. She's doing something to recognize this is najasa. You know, and that really had an impact on me. It's just a hard time for people. You know, and a lot of these people come from places where there's not a lot of, I mean, you guys are so privileged, like the privilege that we have in this country. And I'm talking about all the way down, because poor people in this country are like rich people in places I've lived at. You know, but we're a very spoiled people. Because people, I mean, there's so many people that their lives are dictated by circumstances that are so beyond the pale of what we could imagine in terms of hardship. Because we haven't experienced those things. At least most of us. I mean, Freydun has. Freydun, you know, I mean, he was a refugee of a war. They crossed the border fleeing Afghanistan into Persia. He had to, you know, and he comes from the Mujaddidi family. These were the notables of Afghanistan. They're one of the aristocratic families of Afghanistan, descendants of Ahmed Sirhindi, descendants of Omar Farooq, you know. But they lost everything and had to come, and then they come to America. You know, so there's a lot of people like that in this country that are immigrants, but people that grew up here, they don't know what that's like. You know, you see people, you don't know what they've been through. I'm being asked to remind all of you about Ramadan giving and also the 12K. We really need people to sign up. We hope you it's not much, $1 a day. Keep shaitan away, inshallah. Yeah, online questions. I think there was some before we go there. Did anybody hear? Yeah, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Last week you mentioned people that are spiritually deluded on their spiritual state, and yesterday we mentioned the ayah of those who can't see, can't hear.
Yeah.
So can you please share some advice on what we can do to make sure we're not of those people?
Well, I think all of us are going to have blind spots. All of us are going to have some levels of, you know, delusion. I think it's part of the human condition. If the veils were lifted, most of us, as Imam al-Ghazali says, you know, if the veils were lifted, we would be wandering in the forest saying, Subhanallah. You know, so there's a blessing in having, you know, the veils that Allah has placed upon us. But we should ask Allah at least to, you know, أريني الحق حقا وارزقني اتباعه وأريني الباطل باطلا وارزقني اجتنابه. I mean, that's it's one of my favorite du'as. I actually was asked to write in a multi-faith book on people's favorite prayers, and I think that's the one that I put from the Prophet ﷺ, because it's such a comprehensive thing to show me the truth as truth and then give me the ability to follow it, because there's a lot of people that see the truth and they don't follow it, and show me falsehood as falsehood, because a lot of people see falsehood as truth, and give me the ability to avoid it. So we just ask Allah. And like I said, prayer on the Prophet is a really powerful way of yuhaddib an-nafs, to do prayer on the Prophet ﷺ, to remember the Prophet ﷺ, to try to implement, take on sunan slowly, but take them on. Try to do the different sunan throughout your life. Just add sunan and try to keep them as prophetic practices. The occasional prayers that we just did, those are really beautiful ways of just remembering God, and they're not easy to practice. As somebody who really does try to practice them as much as possible, that you forget, you know, and sometimes you remember afterwards. You forget. Sometimes you go into the water closet, as they say in Europe, you know, and forget to, you know, put your left foot first, and then say Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith when you come out, right foot first. I mean, those things, you know, are becoming mindful, right? Becoming a dhakir, and they're really powerful ways of just becoming more present. And the more you do that, the closer you get to following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the less delusional you're going to be. I really believe that, you know. And then his compassion is really important, because a lot of people have these outward sunan and they don't have the inward sunan, which is a big problem, right? Just to have the inward sunan of humility and also shafaqa, rahmah. I mean, he's rahmatan lil alameen. He's the mercy to all the worlds, to the animal, to vegetable, the mineral. He was a mercy to all of the worlds.